From the banks of Dewey Lake, it's the Dewey Pod Monster.
All right, welcome back. My name is John, and this is the Dewey Pod Monster podcast. This is the original and your weekly podcast about consumption, and we are proud members of the Run Podcast Network. You can find all of our previous episodes, as well as all the other great shows on the Run Podcast Network at yourunpodcast.com. With me this week and every week is the host of the Dewey Pod Monster podcast, and his name is Sean. Sean, how are you doing this evening?
Why? Why?
Perfect answer. You know, not a week goes by that I don't say that when we talk about a movie.
But we have a reason to this week, because there is a big why.
There is a big why for sure. Before we get into that, have you had a chance to catch anything outside of our topic this week?
I surprisingly have, and I'll try to be as brief as possible, because it's kind of brief. So I rewatched for whatever reason. One day I was just feeling froggy, and decided I would watch the Hitman Hart Wrestling with Shadows documentary that has been out for a long time. And if you're unfamiliar, which you may be, I don't know, it's the infamous Montreal screwjob between Vince McMahon and Bret Hart when he was leaving WWF. They wanted him to drop the title. He was the world champion, the WWF world champion. He was leaving to go to WCW. This documentary covers, it had a behind the scenes thing with the Film Board of Canada. They had this documentary there running about Bret Hart, and he was in negotiation, or he was talking back and forth between WWF about his contract and WCW about a new contract. Long story short, he decides that he's going to go to WCW because they were going to pay him like $3 million a year to wrestle for them. And Vince McMahon agrees with him that he will allow Bret to keep his title in Montreal on his last pay-per-view. And then the next day, he'll just do a press conference where he gives the belt back to the WWF. What ended up happening, spoiler for something that happened like 20 years ago, is that they screwed him. Like basically the ref fast counted him. It was against Shawn Michaels. Shawn Michaels, they were kind of a little bit, I think they're a little bit at odds, but they were somewhat friendly. And Shawn Michaels pretended like he had no idea what happened. And this whole thing resulted in...
I feel like that depends on which telling of the story as to how friendly they were, because I've heard some where Bret sounds like he was flat out hating him.
Yeah.
And Shawn was just like, I was doing my job, so I don't know.
Long story short, what ends up happening is Vince McMahon off camera gets punched by Bret Hart in his office, like in the office inside the stadium. And they have footage of like Bret Hart's wife basically telling these people off, Shawn Michaels, Triple H, some other people that were in the background of this thing. So it's a good, if you're into like wrestling lore at all, it's a really interesting documentary because it's not told from the viewpoint of any like interested party so much in the wrestling business, more as just like a documentary. It's like a true documentary. They talked to Bret Hart, they talked to Owen a little bit. I think they talked to his brother Brian. They talked to his sisters, his parents. It's kind of this whole, it's a really, in-depth thing about Bret himself. So I watched that. Other thing that I watched, newer listeners probably don't know this about me, but I get roped into watching quite a few of the Hallmark and Lifetime Christmas movies. And because it's now that time of year, I've already watched 2, and I almost got roped into watching 1 tonight. And I was like, not for me. I watched Scouting for Christmas, and I watched The Date Before Christmas, and there's plenty more. We've just started, so there's going to be plenty more of those for me to watch. If anyone's interested, you and I did record My Southern Family Christmas, which is probably our lowest official podcast, the lowest amount of listeners ever. And I think we're still under 40 listens on that specific podcast from 2 years ago. Was it 2 years ago?
It's around 40. It was the first year we were doing the show. I last time I looked, I think it was around like 17.
It was 35, I think, the last time I looked and talked about it, because I was like, it's pretty low. How low is it? 35 listens. So it's probably not 1 or 2. It might be 36, 37 now. So
if you are curious about hearing about that movie, it stars the man himself, Bruce Campbell.
Yeah.
Sort of. I mean, I don't know if star's the right word. He's in it.
I think he's kind of it might co-star. He's not one of them. Yeah. He's a main character, but he's not like the focus of the movie.
Not necessarily the lead.
Right. And other than that, when this podcast is being recorded, Call of Duty Black Ops 6 just came out. So I've been playing that, and that has been occupying my time instead of editing this podcast. So I've got to stop playing so I can edit the podcast. When I'm in front of my computer, I generally am either watching something or I'm editing this podcast or I'm talking to you. and it's been usurped by playing Black Ops 6, so I've got to curb that.
So, as a guy who doesn't play games, does Call of Duty Black Ops 6 or whatever, is it radically different than the first one that came out on Xbox, or other than graphics and shit like that? Is it a radically different game? The mechanics, I'm assuming, are similar.
It changes every year. So sometimes for many years, like Modern Warfare, the original Modern Warfare, I don't want to like get into this big thing about Call of Duty, but the original Modern Warfare was like, it was the first multiplayer that really kind of ushered in this new era of like online gaming in the shooter space, like first person shooters. Then it was Modern Warfare 2, like Black Ops came in. And when those were coming out, the Black Ops series and the Modern Warfare series were being developed year after year. But Infinity Ward did Modern Warfare. Then it was Treyarch that did Black Ops, and they'd switch on and off. And then some of the original Infinity Ward people splintered off and they started their own studio, Respawn Studios. They do other games now, but similar. They're like in that lineage. And so the actual game mechanics do change year to year. Like there are some things you can do in some of the games. There's one of my favorites is Advanced Warfare. And that was like, it was near future. It's not future. It's not super futuristic, but it's near future. And all the players have exosuits and you can like boost around and jump, double jump and do all this stuff. I really like that one because the movement's really crazy. But they have like, they have a move called a dolphin dive. And a dolphin dive is like when you're running and instead of crouching or then going prone on the ground, you can like go from running to jumping and crouching, or jumping and going prone at the same time. They call it a dolphin dive. That's like a thing that they do this year that sometimes they have it and sometimes they don't. Sometimes you can slide on the ground, like you can run and go into a crouch and you'll slide. Sometimes you can't. This one you can. It just literally came out, so it's learning all the new shit and all the meta and all the guns and all the attachments and which ones are the one you want to use and the ones that are stronger than the others and the ones that'll get adjusted, and it's just a whole fucking thing.
Well, hot damn.
Yeah. I don't even play that much, and I could probably talk for an hour about all this stupid shit. So I'll just edit the podcast instead.
Just talk about it for an hour and edit all that shit out.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Just everybody that's listening know that this discussion actually went on for 4 hours and John was asleep and I had to wake him up.
That's true. Spilled my drink all over the place, all that good shit. I didn't have a ton that I watched. I did rewatch Halloween Resurrection because as we're recording this, even though this will come out in November, it's still right before Halloween. That's a stupid movie, like just flat out, it's a stupid movie. But I still feel like the idea of the movie is a little bit ahead of its time. Have you seen this one? This is the one with Busta Rhymes in it.
I have seen parts of it.
I'm sure you've seen the karate kicks and shit.
I've seen some of that. Weirdly enough, I saw parts of it at my parents' house last year, and they're not horror people, so it must have just been on. And my dad just didn't change the channel because sometimes he doesn't do, he just lets whatever play. Sure. But I haven't seen the whole thing from start to finish.
So like super crash course, because we'll talk about this one in like 10 Halloweens from now at length. Basically, this movie is like, we have to retcon Michael's death from the last movie. He gets out, gets rid of Laurie like 5 minutes in. And then the rest of the movie is basically this reality TV company bought the Myers house and they're going to put these young people in it. And obviously Michael shows up and fucks things up. As far as how things are written, executed, acted, blah, 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 that all leaves much to be desired. But the idea of turning a slasher movie into a reality TV show for like a one-off movie, I'm kind of surprised it hasn't been done more, at least with like some of the big names. Like it feels like the kind of thing that, whether it's Michael or it definitely feels like something that would work for Freddy, because you could do so much shit with that franchise. Like, why not? I'm kind of surprised that, I'm not surprised that it failed, because at the heart of it, it's not the best movie. It's one of those movies that like people like me like because it's kind of stupid and kind of cheesy, and I find entertainment in that. But the idea behind it, I'm like, I don't remember right now what year that came out, probably somewhere in the early 2000s. It feels like it was a little ahead of its time, and I'm kind of surprised no one fucked around with it more.
Did that immediately follow H2O? Was that the immediate sequel to H2O?
Yeah, I want to say there was like a year or two between them,
okay. But in the series,
it is
the next
yeah.
one. Okay.
Yeah. And then after that, you get into Rob Zombie and the David Gordon Green stuff, which that's a whole different conversation of potentially shitty movies that we'll get to even further down the road, unless I bring them up like this. The other thing that I watched, which I kind of had fun with, even though it was not a good movie, and it kind of has some similarities to our title this week, because it's a movie that has a lot of parts in it that were shot in I don't remember, it's the 70s or the 80s, but like way back. It's called Grizzly 2 Revenge. So it's basically, about a bear getting revenge for reasons.
For bear things.
Doesn't matter what the reasons are. Yeah, bear shit.
You yelled at him for digging in your garbage and stuff like that.
What's funny about it is the clips where you can see, I'm just going to say 80s because I think that's what it's from, is 83 or 4, maybe 85, something like that. The scenes where you see that and there's a big, like, either mechanical or costume bear thing that's just kind of shaking poorly and, like, ripping arms off and shit. That stuff's great. It has a young George Clooney and a young Laura Dern in it, and they both get like fucking mauled in the first 5 minutes of the movie, and that's fine too. And then all of a sudden you're looking at something that is clearly shot on like a very new HD, very clean camera, but like they're trying to make it look like it was, like they're trying to dress people up like it was 1985 still, except they look like people from 20 whatever year they shot it. It gets especially funny because apparently the premise of this movie is like the grizzly who wants revenge goes to like a rock concert and things happen.
He goes to heavy metal parking lot.
Pretty much.
Cool.
But there's scenes where they show like the metalheads running around, like running through the parking lot. And there's some clips where it might have been taken from heavy metal parking lot where they're very clearly like, this is from this period of time. And then they'll cut to like a helicopter shot. I'm like, I don't think this movie had the budget for a helicopter, but whatever. And they cut back and all of a sudden it's like, there's people dressed like it's 1985, but that's clearly a fucking Cybertruck behind them. Like, this is not 1985, shit like that. Pretty sure I watched that on Tubi. Sounds like some kind of bullshit Tubi would have. It's not what I would call a good movie, but it has moderate entertainment just on how like poorly put together this piece of shit is. And again, the stuff that happens from the 80s or the earlier part of the movie, if you like animal kill people movies, like bad Jaws ripoffs, because that's really what the majority of them are, if you can get into those, whatever they are, you can do a lot worse. So
here's a nice piece of shit.
Very accurate. Big piece of grizzly shit. But yeah, I didn't have a whole lot either of this. So again, behind the curtain, we're recording 2 episodes this week. So we didn't, either of us apparently have time to stop doing.
Hey, I watched 2 Halloween. I watched 2 Hallmark Christmas movies.
That's true. And you went into deep detail about them.
I mean, they're all the same. What is there to talk about?
Again, go back and listen to My Southern Family Christmas.
There, you had to think about what that actual name of that was too.
Well, I always want to call it like Bruce Campbell and the Bayou Christmas, but that's not what it is. Yeah, anything else you want to go on before we switch gears and go into the headliner for this movie?
Why?
For this week?
Why?
All right, we'll be back in just a minute, and we're going to talk about the movie New York Ninja. Hey, this is John, and I am excited to tell you about another exciting podcast that you can find on the You Run Podcast Network. If you like spooky stuff, then check out the Paranormal Misfits podcast. This podcast features your favorite besties diving fearlessly into the paranormal, uncovering mysterious phenomena, unraveling mind-bending conspiracies, and sharing their thoughts on all things horror. Head over to yourunpodcast.com now and check out the Paranormal Misfits podcast, as well as all the other great shows on the You Run Podcast Network. All right, so we are back, and as mentioned, we are talking about the movie New York Ninja. It's November, so we talk about ninjas in November. This is the short intro to Ninja November.
Yeah, 2. But
yes,
this is just a kind of a capsule episode because we wanted to talk about some Thanksgiving movies this year, so we're really only going to get to this one Ninja November movie. And this, right. I think this is a pretty good choice.
This is definitely a great choice. Even if you hate this movie, this is a movie that is very right at home with the type of stuff that we talk about, for sure. I do want to mention, if you're not aware, we do a movie screening once a month down at Batch Brewing in Detroit. They're one of the best breweries in the state. I don't think it's shocking either one of us say this. And one of the great staff members there recommended that we check this out. We both looked at him like, what the hell is that? And he said, New York Ninja is this crazy movie. And we were basically sold on that alone. We almost always start with I'll start with the third-party review, and then we'll kind of loop back around to some things, because this movie is a little bit different than some of the other stuff that we've watched before. But our third-party review this week is on Rotten Tomatoes, as always, or as usual, quite frequently, and it comes from Jess. And Jess gives this movie 1 out of 5 stars because she has no class and no sense of entertainment. And she says, awful, just awful. This is trashy, low budget, cheesy 80s flick at best. Can't believe it was made in 2021. Acting is terrible. Fight scenes look like they were choreographed by a 6th grader in his backyard.
A 6th grader? Holy shit. What did it get on the petometer?
The potato meter wasn't good. I'll get back to that. Actually, another weird. So the audience gives it 42% on the whatever meter, potato meter. The critics give it 96%.
Wow. That's a pretty big swing.
I feel like it's
It's usually
generous even for us.
Yeah.
So Sean, let's start with the plot on this one, and then we'll get into the cast and some things I feel like we should probably get out of the way first before we start breaking down what this movie is actually about.
Yeah, sure. So for that, we go over to IMDb and we type in the words New York Ninja. When you type that in, it comes up with this movie, and it says, well, there's actually no number. It's not a number out of any number. This is like one of the most recent unrated movies that we've watched. I feel like the last few that we've watched have had some kind of popularity number associated with them. This one does not. This has 1.8K, so 1,800 ratings. It gets a 5.4 on IMDb. And we look at the storyline and the plot. We look at the one on the top, never quite sure which one it is until we look at the one on the bottom. But this one says whatever the thing on the top's called. Originally shot in 1984 and not finished until 2021, New York Ninja is about a sound technician for a news station, John Liu, who becomes a vigilante ninja in New York City after his pregnant wife is murdered. And if we scroll on down to the storyline, this comes care of, and thank you very much, Nick Reganis, because he supplies us with another great storyline. It says, with the police unable to rid the streets of New York City of the lawless punks and the scum of the earth, John Liu, a grieving local TV station sound technician, finds himself forced to take the law into his own hands. However, as the inconspicuous master of unconventional warfare and assassination slips into his white shinobi uniform, hell-bent on lowering the crime rate with his razor-sharp katana, the extreme vigilante catches the eye of the dangerous plutonium killer and every cutthroat in the region. Now there is no turning back. Can the fearless New York Ninja become the city's new hero?
You know what's kind of funny about that storyline?
Yeah.
I don't think he ever uses his katana against any of the bad guys.
He
I
does.
don't think he does. He uses it on his hands.
I mean, I don't know if what he has can technically be considered a katana, because a katana is like a longer sword. He has it's like almost a knife, but
They're like 2 swords. But
yes,
I digress.
yes, we're getting too deep. Let's pull it back a little bit.
What needs to be said about this movie before we start breaking down everything that we usually do is this movie is unique in that it is a movie this movie was re-released by Vinegar Syndrome in 2021. Said this before we started recording, but we might just have to go through the entire Vinegar Syndrome catalog, because if they're dropping stuff like this and Champagne and Bullets and Miami Connection, these are clearly our kind of people. Like I'm becoming a fan of them quickly. But what happened with this movie is this movie was shot in 1984 and apparently it was directed by John Liu, who you probably know him. I can't think of his other movies off the top of my head, but he's some that you've probably seen before if you watch ninja shit. Sean will probably be able to fill me in on some of the stuff that he's done that I can't think of. Essentially, when they bought this, they got all the original negatives for the movie, but there was no audio, no storyboards, no nothing. They just got a bunch of basically different scenes on negative that they in turn hired someone to essentially direct and take all the shot film that they have, put it together as a movie, and then hire some pretty notable voiceover actors, put audio to it, and kind of piece this scene together into what turns into New York Ninja. So that's why outside of John Liu, am I saying that right?
I think
John
so.
Liu?
Yeah, that looks
Okay.
like what it looks like to me.
So outside of John Liu, most of the cast that you're going to see credited in this movie are people that you know, and we're going to get that in just a second, but they're not really acting like per se. They're just doing voice acting through this movie. So with that in mind, if you want to fill me in on what John Liu movies I've seen that I can't think of off the top of my head, feel free to. And who's in this movie?
So you are not going to recognize any of these movies that John Liu was in. But
Me personally or in general?
no, I think like if you're really into maybe Shaw Brothers movies, like really into them, you might recognize him. Some of the movies that he was in were most recently before this was, well, I guess, it's a weird timeline. Other thing, just real quick to mention, they had about 6 to 8 hours of film to edit together for this movie. So that's a lot. But he was in a movie in 2013 called Welcome, Mr. President. 2006, Any Reason Not to Marry. Everything else is like they're clearly kung fu type movies, and they're all like, Chinese names. So you're probably, if I were to badly butcher these, you would probably not recognize these.
I was going to say, I thought he was Vietnamese, but he's Taiwanese. So my bad.
Yeah. I mean, the titles appear to be Chinese. I don't speak Chinese or Mandarin or any of that stuff, but I'm just going to go off what it looks like and that stuff.
So who else is in this movie?
Like you mentioned, there's a lot of voice work on this movie. So we have Don Wilson, Don the Dragon Wilson. He is voicing John Liu's character. We have Michael Berryman, who you may know from like The Hills Have Eyes. What else has he been in?
MacGyver.
Your favorite, The Guyver. He was in Weird Science.
He's in a bunch of Rob Zombie movies.
Yeah, he's the guy with he's really interesting looking. You would know him if you've seen him. We have Linnea Quigley, who plays the newswoman, Randy Rydell. We've got Cynthia Rothrock, who plays one of the detectives. We've got Ginger Lynn. Who else would you recognize? Some of the people. I don't know. There's just a lot of actors.
Those are the big names.
Yeah, those are probably the big ones. But they're not appearing in this movie. They're just voicing characters in this movie. So they didn't have a script. They basically had to. There's no sound. There was no sound on the film doesn't come with sound. So they had to pretty much read lips on all this stuff and try to interpret what they actually said. And they kind of fill in these additional things, which I thought was pretty hilarious.
I really like that this movie taught me that I can pick out Linnea Quigley's voice without seeing Linnea Quigley behind the person talking, which I was like, oh, I guess I've hit that point in my relationship with this woman that I'll probably never meet.
Can anyone say parasocial? I do want to also mention that the special effects budget on this movie, I read, because the only script, they did actually have a script. The only script they had was from one of the effects guys. He said that they spent $100. They had $100 budget for special effects, and that was mostly spent on the rubber face stuff that the plutonium killer had on his face and on his hands. He does several scenes where his hands have they look like stigmata or something on his hand. But that was what that super huge special effects budget was spent on.
Wonder how they got the helicopter then.
Well, that's not special effects.
Oh, okay.
I'm speaking just straight up special effects budget.
You're talking special, practical effects.
Super special effects.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll go ahead and take a crack at saying what this movie is about, and then we can kind of go from there and do our usual shtick. I mean, essentially, this movie is about a dude who, I don't know, I assume he lives in New York. And he goes to his girlfriend, wife, whatever, to start the movie. They basically meet in some part of New York, and she says, or he goes up to her, he's like, hey, we're going to get dinner. She goes, cool, I'm pregnant. And he goes, oh, that's awesome. I'll see you later. Takes off. Middle of the day, she starts to go into the subway and immediately gets her throat cut and stabbed in the belly because fuck them kids, I guess. This takes John Liu and essentially throws him into a revenge story for the rest of this movie, I guess, kind of, sort of. He decides that he's going to rough up all the punks and, be the essentially Spider-Man, but in ninja form for New York. And that's pretty much it. There's other things that happen there's a lot of things that happen in the movie, and there's a lot of characters that pop up in the movie.
Yeah.
But I think that is the plot, is guy's wife and baby die, I guess, or guy's wife died, depending on how you view how pregnant she is, because she doesn't look pregnant. Not that I'm digging a hole, John. Dig a hole. But that's pretty much it.
Here's a shovel for you.
Right. That's pretty much it. There's not a whole lot past that other than all the crazy shit that happens in between that and the end of the movie.
I'd say that's the overarching plot of the entire thing. And then the subplot. Well, I guess that's what kicks these wheels into motion. But the underlying thing is the plutonium killer is this guy who he's sex trafficking women, and it's like they're looking for specific women because he gets pictures.
Is he the one doing it, or
his
he
goons
working for
are
someone doing it? Or it's all very...
It's fluid.
Yes.
It's like there are these thugs, and then there's the plutonium killer who's doing his own thing, and it seems like sometimes he's working with the thugs and sometimes he's not. I wanted to point out that from the very beginning, and I'm just going to totally tip my hand here. From the very beginning, I knew I would like this movie because the opening shot is this scene where the camera is showing, I don't know if it's the World Trade Center or just buildings in New York.
No, the World Trade Center's in there. There's two things I noticed in the background, and there's several things, but that's one of the things I noticed right away is the World Trade Center's there. This was not shot in 2021.
Correct. Yeah. Is that the focus, not the focusing, but the zooming of the camera, that stepping, focusing where it just kind of, it zooms in and then it pauses for a second, then zooms in a little bit more and then zooms in. You can tell someone's turning the zoom ring on a camera. And I was like, I am going to love this movie because it is so shittily, shoddily, cheapily done that you can tell just right from the get-go that this isn't something you don't see that in a regular movie. Like you don't go to the theater, the cinema to go and see a movie, and they don't do that shit. It just shows this level of professionalism in the way that the movie actually looks pretty good. Like the film, it looks good. There's not a lot of shots out of focus. I mean, it's pretty well done as far as that goes. Like technically it looks okay, but just the other weird, crazy, just dumb shit that goes on in this movie, I knew that just straight from the jump that I would like it. Another example that I wanted to use is like there's a scene where they're shooting the scene and a guy's coming out of like a police department or whatever, precinct. He comes out and he's walking. You can tell the camera's supposed to follow him. And as he walks out, you can finally see him from behind a car. A city bus drives by and the bus takes so long to pass that the guy is almost out of frame by the time the bus is done. And they have to like quickly move the camera to find him in the frame. I was like, okay, I found my people. This is a movie that I want to watch and I'm engaged now.
So similar to that, even before the first shot, the title, before the title card screen, the like prologue screen or whatever, where it comes up and says, I'm paraphrasing, but it says something along the lines of New York is a shithole and punks are beating the shit out of everyone and murdering everything. I'm like, I'm already sold on this. Like that right there, you know?
And I want to mention the punks, like these guys.
Oh, they're barely like, this is like they went to Party City and said, just go buy your own costume and that's what you're wearing for the rest of this movie.
This is like every 80s beat 'em up video game punk that you can think of, like Double Dragon or Final Fight or Ninja Gaiden or something. Every one of those stereotypes is represented. Guys with like face paint on,
Cowboy hats,
people with like bandages across part of their face and their bottom, like they look like a mummy and just you can only see their mouth. People that are wearing like their jock straps outside of their clothes. Just every combination of anything that you could think of like an 80s video game punk, they have represented here. I didn't see anybody with a mohawk, but I may have missed them because that's the only thing that you're really missing out on here.
So the other thing that this is something that you can find stuff peppered through this entire film, but the things that caught my attention fairly early that also made me know I was going to love this movie. The scene where right to start the movie, I already mentioned it, you know, girl tells him that he's pregnant, wife, girlfriend, whatever she is. And then she gets her throat cut and stabbed in the belly on the subway stairs. There's two things about that made me laugh. One, broad daylight. No one gives a shit. Yeah. Like this is like 8 a.m. that this is happening. Like people should be out and about. This is New York. Like people should be out and about. And you think you would notice a murder in the street. And there's people walking up the subway streets like, get out of my way, dead body and stuff. The other thing that's equally funny about that, when she gets knifed, there's someone just like unloading their laundry from a car as she's getting murdered next to him in the background. And there's so many things
at all.
Yeah, there's so many things in the background where it's just New Yorkers going about being New Yorkers. They're either eating a hot dog or drinking a soda, whatever it is. Just the people in the background are almost as comical as what's happening in the foreground because there's, you know, ninjas and punks beating the shit out of each other. And they're just like, whatever, I got to go to work, you know, shit like that. The other thing I noticed that I really liked, and I want to say this a little bit more into the movie, but it's another background shot. There's a marquee. It might be on 42nd Street. I don't know. It looks like you caught this too. That's showing Ninja 3, The Domination.
Yeah,
I was pretty happy about that.
I was floored when I saw that. I was like, that is so cool that they had that in the back. I wanted to also point out there's like two distinct things that shots in this movie. There are the ones with the people in the background walking around, and there's a scene where these punks come out of a store or something and they steal these two women's bags and they start running down the street. And there is a bystander that one guy, I only noticed one guy, he has an umbrella in his hand. And this is like guerrilla filmmaking. So they don't have a permit to do this. The guy has his umbrella and he starts like waving his umbrella like he's yelling at him. And then he just kind of gives up. And then the ninja guy comes, the New York Ninja, he's like roller skating down the street after them, like to go get it. And people,
that's in my notes.
People just totally ignore what's going. They're like, oh, fuck it, whatever. This happens every day. The other thing is like where you have some of those shots that are like full of bystanders and just regular New Yorkers doing their day-to-day thing, and they don't give a rip about what the hell's actually going on because they're like, oh, I see people get murdered every day, whatever. The other thing, in contrast, there are scenes where it is eerily desolate. Like they are in New York, they're down, and there is nobody on the street, and you're like, did they film this like at daybreak? Nobody's on, and there's still people on the street in New York and at sunrise. How did they get this area? It looks fairly busy area, but there is no one there. And you're just like, what the?
So I know some of it's shot in New Jersey from what I've heard.
Oh,
or
okay.
what I listened to, which would probably explain a lot of that and explain how they were able to continue to film a lot of this. So that's some of it. There was something else you said there that I was the roller skates. Can we talk about the roller skates? Because that was one of the first things I noted.
I would love to.
I don't remember the last time I saw a roller skating scene that was this entertaining. And it totally caught me off guard because I was like, is that motherfucker on skates? And then he suddenly was not on skates. Like he does this like big midair flip and he lands flat footed, no skates. And they cut to some like punks that are like, hey, get over here. And they cut back to him and he's
got
on
skates
skates
on
again.
Yep.
It is. And again, all this you can almost take with a grain of salt and almost look at it as like the charm of this movie. If you know the background of how this movie got to be pieced together to be this product that we're watching, I actually think that does kind of help. Well, who am I kidding? If this came out exactly like this and it was all from 1984, I would have been just as entertained.
Oh, yeah.
But just the editing job and the whole like, no skates or whatever. And there's tons of continuity shit like that in this. Like if you're a fan of finding continuity errors, this is the movie for you.
Right. Yeah. Just, I love that you can see there are some scenes where John Liu is the guy in the costume. And then if it's a shot where there's like the roller skating scene, it's not him. It's like a little bit of a thicker, kind of chunkier dude, but not super fat or anything. He's just a little heavier. You can just he fills out the costume a little bit better.
It kind of implies that John Liu had to get behind the camera to get the shot when this was originally filmed. And they put this guy out there as a body double.
Yeah. And if there's something where there's like sword twirling or something, it generally, just looking at what you can see from the costume, like the face, you can tell it's not the same guy.
It's like all of a sudden there's a white guy under there or something.
Yeah, like a dark-haired white guy. But you can definitely tell the difference between him and John Liu.
So, I mean, we're not going to break down plot by plot. I
No.
almost feel like this movie deserves it because it's so fucking out there. But some of the other things that I wrote down, and we've already hinted at this several times, this might have the best why God, why scene in the history of film.
It's not fair. It's not fair. Why? Why? Why?
Once his wife gets killed and he knows that she's pregnant, and he was he was ecstatic that he's like, I'm going to be a daddy. I'm going to be a daddy. I think that's the actual quote. Hey, everybody, I'm going to be a daddy. He's up on the roof.
Even though he walks away, even though she tells him and he's like, cool, see you later. And like, there's no rejoicing with her.
Oh, yeah. It's all on his own. He's like, man, I'm going to be a daddy. When she gets killed, it's supposed to be his birthday, I think. So he's waiting on the roof for her, and he knows that she's not coming.
I thought it was her birthday. And I was like,
somebody's birthday.
Why is she getting ninja swords? Is this like a...
Yeah, that's why I thought
or...
it was his birthday, because the gift that they have on the rooftop dinner or whatever is a set of ninja swords, and you're like, wait a second, is he giving that to her? Is she giving that to him? Like, well, how's that going to work out? He does the best axe kick of all time to destroy this table and basically cut it in half, and the picture falls, and he's like breaking the glass in his hands, and it's like cutting his hands. He's why? You can really feel the angst, of Don the Dragon Wilson.
So not long after this, he decides that he's essentially going to be Batman, Spider-Man of this movie. And there is no like call for this. Basically, wherever the camera happens to be where bad shit's going on,
he'll be there.
Here comes the ninja. But what's kind of funny about him being there is, I guess he stops the crime from escalating to a point where it's like you can't heal up from it. But like every time he gets to the scene of a crime, like whoever the victim is still gets fucked up in the process. Like the best is when he goes to save the kid, who's the character, by the way. The character's name is the Kid.
Yes.
So I'm not making that up in this one.
He's just the kid.
He's actually the kid. These three like thugs like run this kid down behind, I guess, an outhouse of some. It looks like a park outhouse, like bathroom, like a little shack with just toilets and shit.
It looks like they vaguely tried to make it like a pagoda or something. Like vaguely kind of tried to make it look like it was in some Asian area, but it's probably just an outhouse or a utility shed or something.
Right. So these three like full grown adults are sitting there like kicking the shit out of this like 8-year-old or whatever he is. that goes on for several minutes. And then here comes the New York Ninja, and he, kind of roughs him up a little bit, but essentially gets shot. And then the kid maybe gets shot in the act of trying to save the ninja. I'm not 100% sure.
The kid, he definitely gets shot.
Does he? Because they cut to John Liu like digging the bullet out of his chest in a way that I'm like, I don't think that would work. I think he would push the bullet, because he basically takes like a knife or like a spearhead or something and just kind of digs into his chest, and out comes the bullet. I don't think that would work, but I'm not a surgeon.
Yeah, same. I've not performed any surgery legally.
If right. And then the kid comes to like several seconds later, and it's just like, oh, he's like, can I just hang out here? He's like, yeah, sure. I'll abduct you and keep you here. Why not?
Can we be friends? No, get the fuck out.
Yeah, come watch me go fishing in the fucking harbor with my thong or something.
Yeah, with this big freaking banana hammock. And he's fishing with he's doing spear fishing while the kid's using it's like a thing to build camaraderie or show that they're like, oh, they're getting to be friends, because it's a couple weeks later. It actually says a few weeks later. And he has one of those like spears with all the, like a spear fishing spear. And he's like up to his shins in the water, essentially. Like he's going to get some big fish in wherever I don't know if he's supposed to be in the ocean or something. It's a super
New
ridiculous,
York.
silly
I can't
scene.
imagine that you're getting a lot of fish
that close to the shore
in New York.
Yeah, I mean, I could see people, I'm sure people fish there all the time, but you're so shallow. What are you going to catch? Like minnows?
Minnow. All right. It's pretty ridiculous, and it's pretty great at the same time. Somewhere along the line with this too, he also takes the time to stop off at Cafe Press and get monogrammed ninja stars. I'm not quite sure where that came from, but I love it. Like, I would have loved to seen the first couple trial runs where like the fonts are wrong or something like that.
God damn it.
Right.
Gonna have to kill these low-level thugs with these.
And he's also pretty liberal with just like ninja starring the shit out of everything. Like, I don't know how much ninja stars cost, but I'm guessing if the effects budget in this movie was $100, they had to blow the rest of the budget on monogram ninja stars, because there's at least 10 that they show on screen. So that's I got to think at least $100 right there.
They really only had 3. They just kept reusing. Oh yeah, see this one? People, when he hits people with the shuriken, they like hold it between it's like against their body, and they're holding it between their fingers as if that's like speared them. It's like the spike on that thing has to be like 3 inches for it to get between where you're holding it with your fingers and actually do any damage to you. But hey.
Except for when they get hit in the back where it looks like it's being held on with red duct tape.
Or yeah, it's like on a plate or like a piece of cardboard or something through their shirt. Yeah.
Right. You want to know the thing that drove me the most nuts about this movie? Like kind of to why it might have pissed me off.
Let's hear it.
What was up with the cop's hat?
Oh my God, I was going to ask you. So it's like a trucker hat.
Seriously, what the fuck is up with this hat?
It's a trucker hat, and the front panel is foam, and it's curled under because it's like folded.
It's like they tried to turn it into a military cap,
yes,
but keep it looking like a trucker cap at the same time. And I don't know if they did it because this is an insanely stupid comment, but I'll say it anyway. I don't know if they did it because they thought this guy's head was too big for a military cap, so this was a better option, or is this just how this maniac wears his hat?
I was wondering, because the guy has a flat top. He's got like a high top. It's not a fade, but he just has a little bit of a high top. And I was wondering if they made the hat like that so that when they wanted to film different scenes, it wouldn't mess up his hair too much. So it was kind of folded in. It would keep his hair. It wouldn't smush his hair down. So then when he could just take it off and do a scene and have it come back and put it on. Because that's the only thing I could think of. Why would the hat look so ridiculous? At first I was like, is that like some kind of military cap or something? But as the scenes went on, you could see it was like a foam trucker hat.
You figure it out as soon as he turns, like his profile turns. You're like, what the fuck is on this dude's head?
It almost looked like they just put something on a regular hat that was just taller than the hat would be. So it had this little fold to it. But it was the silliest, most ridiculous looking baseball cap style hat I've ever seen.
It's almost worth watching the movie just to see this stupid hat. And you'll get endless entertainment from it aside from that.
Yeah, leading up to that and afterwards. But watch the movie for the hat. That should be the quote on the box.
Watch the movie for the hat.
You need to watch this movie, but watch it for the hat and stay for the entertainment.
And then I got a couple other things written down, and I'll let you kind of hit some bullet points if you got them, because I'm sure I'm missing stuff, because this is one of those that there's so much and I don't want to spill everything. But so when did Sidewalk Chalk become a ninja weapon? Because I feel like more so than the ninja stars is he's got these like chalky eggs. And at first I'm like, oh, he's going to do the smoke bomb thing and disappear or whatever. But he never does. he just kind of like
Pelts them with it.
explodes them in people's face, and they get like all fucking disoriented, and he kicks them in the face or whatever, does ninja shit. Where do these eggs come from?
He must be making them.
I listened to a different show that was talking about this, just trying to like make sure I didn't miss anything. And they're like, someone goes, "Oh, it's ground glass in like a ceramic egg." I'm like,
What?
that almost opens up more questions than what it answers. I think it's just chalk. My opinion is, I think they took the idea of the smoke bomb and tried to make it a projectile
Yeah, weapon.
and just went from that. But he uses that more than any other weapon in the movie.
It looks like that old thing. I don't know if you ever did this as a kid, but you poke a hole on the top and the bottom of an egg and you blow the yolk out of it. And then you just have an empty eggshell that's like the same. And then they poured chalk into it, like you said, because he's just whipping it at people and it hits them and they're like, oh, and it just leaves like this little white chalky mark on their clothes, but it seems to stun them somehow. Maybe the intent was for it to be, oh no, it's ground glass for sure, but it's definitely chalk or baby powder or something.
Yeah, it's something less than lethal for sure. What am I missing here? Because like I said, there's so much stuff in this movie. Like I'm honestly not trying to hit every bullet point on this, because I honestly feel like this is on Tubi right now. And
Yes.
I know we'll link it in the notes. So this one, unlike Champagne and Bullets, which I kind of felt the same way about, you almost have to see this movie to believe it. But fill me in on some of the stuff that you might think I'm missing that needs to be said to kind of sell this.
Well, I think to your point, it's like looking, this is what I'll say about the movie, and then I'll get into some of the little details. This movie is like looking at a fine piece of art. Like there's just so much to look at. There's so much to see, and it's impossible to focus just on one thing. You have to see this to believe it yourself, because it is, I don't know how they filmed all this crap. They must have known that they were going to make something that was like somewhat funny, intentionally funny, but also unintentionally hilarious. Like they probably didn't plan on that. I just had a couple quick points. My favorite quote of the movie is when one of the thugs has one of the women in his, like, in the dungeon or wherever they're keeping all these women, and he lifts her head up and he's like, "What are you looking at?" And she doesn't say anything, and he pushes her face down. He's like, "Look at the ground." That's my favorite quote of the movie. Like, you lifted her head up to look at you, and then you pushed her head down and said, "Don't look at me," essentially. And then there's a scene where they're all the thugs, they're like kind of ganging up on the ninja, and the kids show up and they're like, we're going to crowd them. They just like run at them. And some of them are dressed like,
oh, geez, I forgot about that.
Some of them are dressed like ninjas. Some of them just have like a t-shirt with like New York Ninja on a piece of paper, like safety pin to their shirt.
I forgot how good he was at marketing himself.
Yeah. It's like this. I'll get to that in a second, but it reminded me of that meme, that old meme from like, I don't know, the early 2000s, like how many toddlers can you fight at one time or whatever it is. I don't know if you remember that, but that's what that made me think of. This movie is filmed right in the height of the big, like, I Love New York marketing to try and change the image of the city. So there's I Love New York Ninja, and that's everywhere. Like the t-shirts start showing up, kids have it on, they have signs and all this shit with the New York Ninja stuff on it. I would almost say, if we were going into dislikes, I don't have a lot of dislikes, but the pacing, it gets a little draggy in the middle and it kind of becomes convoluted with the plutonium killer, but it's so entertaining, all of it anyways. Everything that I would say that I dislike, they're so over the top, ridiculous, and bad that at the same time, I like those things. So it's hard for me to point out specific things that I just don't like. I think it's hilarious that when they're fighting with weapons, it's almost reminiscent of like you and your buddies going in the backyard and hitting each other with sticks. It's so disorganized. They're actually waiting for each other to do a move before the other one can do a move. It's hilarious. There's another scene in particular I just want to point out. When the cameraman guy, this group of gang members they bash the shit out of his car and flip his car over, and he goes to confront them. And it's like, dude, there are like 20 of these guys.
Which is ridiculous to begin with.
Yeah, it is. And there's 20 of these guys. It's fucking totaled. Sorry.
Your car's already flipped over. It's already flipped over at this fucking point. Like, dude, just cut your losses.
He expects that they're going to flip the car back over and replace like all the windows and shit. It's just like, really? And there are guns in this movie. And I don't actually know if a gun even gets fired. Nobody gets killed with a gun.
See, I don't think it does. And my theory on that is similar to I don't think they use the swords at any point, even though you're saying they do.
There's one where he swipes them, but nobody has blood or anything.
I think the reason behind that is, we've already mentioned this is like guerrilla style filmmaking. They're just running around doing whatever the fuck they're doing. Gunshots draw attention. So I think they just decided we're not going to shoot the gun because we don't want to deal with the repercussions, like the real life
makes
repercussions of shooting the gun, is my theory.
And muzzle flashes cost money,
Yeah, that
You
too.
can't just be like, boo boo.
And this is, I don't know if airsoft guns were around in 84 or not, but this is before the days of airsoft guns where you could go in and like AR some, gunshots or whatever on the back end of it.
Yeah.
And you mentioned something too of like, we didn't even bring up the plutonium killer or whoever is supposed to be the big bad in this because there's several of them. We didn't bring up the limo driver that's chewing on his rat tail.
Oh, yeah.
Which is equally, especially the first time he does it.
You're like, what the fuck?
There's part of me that almost wishes he only did it the first time just because it'd be even more weird. The fact that it comes back around.
Yeah, the mystery.
Yeah, it comes back around and he does it 2 or 3 more times in the movie. They're like, oh, this is just like his thing, I guess.
It's his kink.
If he only did it the one time and that was it, it'd be even more of a what the fuck. So yeah, I honestly feel like this is a movie that we could probably go on about well past the runtime of this movie because it is so ridiculous. But I don't want to do that. That's not what we do on this show.
We want to leave some of it up to you guys to watch because,
right.
Yeah, spoilers. You should watch it.
I think it's pretty obvious at this point that like, yeah, we're fans of this. So with that in mind, where are we at, Sean? What time is it?
Then you're in for a big treat, bro, because it's hot dog time.
Sean, why don't you kick us off this week? I don't remember. I think I went first last. And
Who knows? Well, I just wanted to start this prefacing to the listeners. John and I had this discussion. John wants to get away from the ratings, so I didn't come up with a number, but I could tell I'm just going to get into it. I could tell within minutes that the world is a better place because this movie was made. I mean, it's clearly obvious to me. Everything about it is hokey but fun. It's like almost post-apocalyptic with the street gangs and the different kind. It's like Warriors with the different breeds of gang members, but they're not. None of them are ever cohesive at all. There are people wearing their underwear outside their clothes. Some of them have face paint. Some have stick-on mustaches. I even saw a guy who wears those tanning booth eye protectors as his goggles, which is genius. Like, I've always wanted to do that, and I'm living vicariously through this guy. Movies like this make me wonder if they were even actually filmed in earnest, because the action, the story, all that stuff is so silly and ridiculous. It makes me realize that this movie was the type of movie I was born for. This is tailor-made for me. There's no more ratings, like I mentioned, or at least, I don't know, maybe John will flip-flop on it, but I can only give a singular hot dog in support of this, in support of you watching this movie, in support of you watching this movie as soon as possible. It's on Tubi for free. There's no reason you shouldn't go out and watch it. You got to see it. I say hooray for New York Ninja. Would you like to address the ratings, John, that you so cruelly swiped away from us?
I'm just saying, and this is the same argument I made to you. I think anyone who actually listens to the show is going to have a good idea of where we fall in the majority of the movies that we talk about beforehand. I just want to get away from the whole number part of it. I do want to keep the hot dogs with it, though.
Yeah, we have to.
That's part of our DNA.
That's right.
So with that in mind, sound clip.
Oh, yeah.
Whose hot dog is this, huh? Is it yours?
This is a fully loaded chili dog, extra onions, slathered up with mustard. This movie is just fucking fun. This is the kind of movie that you could pick apart in all the good ways. You could pick apart in all the bad ways. You could say a million things about it. But at the end of the day, if you don't have fun watching this movie, you're a fucking moron. Like, just that simple. This is great. Like Sean said, it's on Tubi right now. It's available for free. There'll be a link in the show notes that you can be able to get to it. If it's a Vinegar Syndrome movie, so if you're looking for a hard copy, it's probably going to cost you like $100 and upwards of that, because those go fucking crazy on price. But it's just fucking great. Like, there is absolutely no reason I would say that you should not watch this movie unless you don't like fun, in which case you suck. So that's simple.
You're probably dead.
It's a good one. Yeah. Go enjoy some plutonium and watch New York Ninja. All right. That was probably the quickest rating we've ever done, but that's fine. this movie is, I honestly think that's a testament to how fun this movie is. It's like, I don't even need to sell it. Like, if you're not sold on it already, like, that's on you. Also, I want to say thank you to Batch and having an amazing staff that finds gems like this that they kind of throw our way. And it's like, hey, you should really watch this. These are the kind of recommendations. And our last few recommendations have been really strong because we had this, we had The Hidden, which we both really liked, and we had Basket Case, which was pretty fucking entertaining as well. So anyone who wants to recommend stuff, please keep them coming. We'll get into where you can send them to us, but these are the kind of movies that we really enjoy talking about, especially if we can find one where we can both go into fresh, all the better.
Yep.
Switching gears and heading over to question of the week. This week's question of the week kind of focuses on New York, and it is, what is a movie where New York almost feels like a character itself, and how does it shape the plot? I didn't get a lot of how it shapes the plot. I think this describes itself, but we'll start over on X with our answers because that's what I'm looking at right now. And leading us off is Justin over at Pop Culture Reflection Podcast, another great show on the Run Podcast Network. And he says, Lost in Translation. It is built on Japanese culture, jet lag, and feeling out of place and self-crisis. Did you watch that movie? I haven't watched it in a long time.
I have not seen the full thing. And it was all the, I've already discussed, I avoid hype, and that movie had so much hype on it. I think I'm never going to see that movie. I think I did try to watch it, and it was just one of those movies that I watched when I was really tired. And it's not a strike against the movie. I was just super tired and I fell asleep.
I remember it being a victim of the hype for me. I watched it after the hype died down, but I remember watching it and it just fell flat for me. But I've also looked at it a couple times, like, maybe I need to give this another chance because I do usually like Bill Murray, and Scarlett Johansson's the female lead in that, if I remember right.
Yeah.
And I don't have anything against her per se. I think she's a little overrated, but whatever. So maybe I need to pop that in again. Back over on X, friends over at Dissect That Film simply said Taxi Driver. Awesome answer. It's probably one of the more iconic movies that features the city of New York that you could even mention for sure. And then immediately after that, at Aaron Malcolm says, I was going to say Taxi Driver, but someone else already mentioned it. So I'm going to go with The 25th Hour or Son of Sam. Both are Spike Lee joints. 25th Hour explores the post 9/11 New York City, while Son of Sam examines the fear and paranoia of New York City surrounding the SOS killings. Both are highly rewatchable. So I wasn't a fan of The 25th Hour. I started falling off the Edward Norton bandwagon. Son of Sam's a pretty great movie, though.
I think that Spike Lee is probably a really prime example. Any of the movies that he has made that take place in New York is like, it's its own character. I mean, you think of something like Do the Right Thing. How could you not say that New York is a character of that movie?
So, going to move over to Facebook where people were more talkative, which is a good thing. And we're going to start with Evan, who made the great recommendation of The Hidden. And he says, I don't expect you to read this, but this is a topic that is always fascinating. Chud, Escape from New York, Death Wish, and Joker, if you're one of those Archie types, probably typify the late 70s, early 80s New York is a fucking hellhole and maybe should just be leveled aesthetic that didn't really disappear until the Home Alone 2 era and Disney-fied New York came into the public consciousness. He goes on quite a bit. I'm not going to read the whole thing because he breaks down each movie in particular and he makes some really great points. We will link this particular post in the show notes. So if you want to see Evan's response in full, you can go there and check it out. But frankly, I suck at reading in public and I'm not going to read this whole thing right now. Unless Sean wants to embarrass me.
It's true. He does suck at reading in public.
I do suck. And then our friend OJ says, the Raimi Spider-Man movies, there's always at least one scene of the city uniting behind Spider-Man, most likely because 9/11 happened during the production of the first film. Fair.
Yeah. They had to change the trailer. Remember that? There was a scene in the original trailer, there was a scene where it was like a bank heist or something, and there was a helicopter and it took off. And in the original trailer, the teaser, whatever, it was that the helicopter got caught between the Twin Towers in a web that Spider-Man had made. And of course, that whole thing happened and they had to scrap that whole thing.
Now that you say that, I remember that. I totally remember, what was that? A Nickelback song and just it being like the mantra of New York's revival after 9/11 for 2-3 years there.
Had to rally around Nickelback for all things.
Was it Nickelback that did that song? I think it was.
Whatever
Nickelback.
you're saying sounds familiar, but Nickelback's Canadian. That still, I wouldn't put it past them. Damn Canadians. Is it Hero?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Nickelback. And Saliva, I think.
Chad Kroeger. It is Nickelback. Okay.
Cool.
So I was right. Fucking Nickelback.
Yeah, Hero will save us.
I won't stand in his way either. Over on Instagram, our friend Jordana at Pretty Killer Podcast says The New York Ripper by Fulci. Lucio Fulci? She was talking about this movie like 3-4 months ago. She's been getting into giallo movies, and this is one that like caught my eye, and I still haven't gotten around to watching it, and I definitely need to. Have you seen this one?
I haven't seen a lot of Fulci movies.
I've only seen a handful of them, but that's one that I definitely need to visit and then potentially revisit, sounds like.
There you go.
At The Hop Demon says Taxi Driver and Jason Takes Manhattan. At Lumberjay Reviews, who is a member of the Urine Podcast Network, you can make sure to check out his show, their show with him and Becky. They do the Girl and the Gay podcast, which is an awesome podcast on the Urine Podcast Network. And he says The Devil Wears Prada. Never watched it. And then last and certainly not least, quite possibly my favorite response of all these, Old Dirty Bastard, who's one of the crusty boys over at You Can Eat That Crust podcast. Again, awesome members of the You Run Podcast Network, says Die Hard with a Vengeance. My favorite Die Hard movie. I love New York in that movie because it is got a lot of similarities with this, in which you have terrorists doing shit and people are just going about their day like, hey, I gotta drive my cement truck through the fucking sewer because that's what I do. And here comes John McClane to fuck shit up. Yeah.
Ruin your day.
Sean, what do you think? What is the movie where New York is as much of a character as any of the characters or something?
I think for me, I focus more on the movies that I think of the 80s, like the dingy, grubby kind of crime-ridden New York, much like Evan mentioned. A few people mentioned Taxi Driver. Taxi Driver is definitely one of them. I would say like The Warriors is another one. I mentioned The Warriors earlier. And we just watched this movie. We just talked about this movie, Basket Case. New York hangs over that story like a fucking cloud, because so much of that stuff that happens in the city, you know, it all happens in that kind of boarding house or flop house or whatever kind of area, you know, rent a hotel room by the day, or well, I guess every place is like that. But the hotel that they stay in, all those different people living there together, it adds that whole like, you know, melting pot or mixing bowl of like how all these people live together. So I think because it's so fresh in my mind, I would say Basket Case is like totally fits in that category.
Yeah. So I agree with you about The Warriors. That was one of the ones that I thought about immediately when we brought this question up. And I don't know how you couldn't. That movie is so like just about New York and tribalism. And again, you and I both like this, whether it's New York or Detroit or Chicago or whatever city. Like I think we both like seeing the, you know, earlier stages of the grimy kind of underbelly of the city is what we like to see in film. Similar to Basket Case, I kind of say I like how New York is represented in Frankenhooker, which is the same type, same director, same vibe, even though it's about a full decade after Basket Case. The other one that always sticks out to me, and these are much more lighthearted than what any of the other ones that we mentioned, is Ghostbusters 1 and 2. Like those movies, although I don't know that they represent the true like feeling of New York as far as like people who actually like respect and kind of come together and work together and shit. They featured guys running around New York, getting into all the monuments, all the stuff you expect to see in New York, like Statue of Liberty and, you know, the fountains, all that shit.
Yeah, they hit the high points.
Yeah, they hit all those in the movie. So it's one of those movies, even though it is very much so tonally different than every other movie that we just mentioned, maybe not Die Hard, but the majority of the movies that we just mentioned, it feels like New York is as much a part of it as anything else in those movies to me.
And it almost makes New York, it's those two movies, Ghostbusters 2, that's almost like the turning point where in movies, not all movies, I'm sure there's like rom-coms and stuff from all that whole time that they treated New York like, you know, kinder, gentler New York. Some of the rough edges were taken off, but it feels like in popular cinema, that's where a lot of those movies started to transform New York from being that gritty, dingy kind of city to being like that little bit nicer, more elevated. Now it's like everything's kind of cleaned up. And I'm sure that has a lot to do with like governmental changes and everything that happened in the city over that time frame. But I always think of Ghostbusters as one of those ones where, yeah, there is a little bit of a dingy, kind of grimy coating on it, but they wipe it off real nice for like movies that came after.
The first movie, especially, you could almost say it feels like the city's going through a revival in that one, and the Ghostbusters are part of that revival. The second one, not so much. Like the second one feels like it's just totally playing up like, hey, we're in New York. Here's the Statue of Liberty. Let's put some slime on it. You know, shit like that.
Let's put some slime on it.
Yeah, but the first one for sure. And the second one, I think it's just they beat you over the head with, I mean, it's New York. If I remember right, it's New Year's Eve on that. Like they really just hammer home like New York stuff. This is what we do here. We like the Statue of Liberty.
I like that.
Anyway, I think that's all we got for this week. Again, please, for the love of Satan or God, whatever you're into, watch this movie. It won't offend either. Well, maybe God, but it won't offend either of them. It's on Tubi for free. New York Ninja. Highly recommend it. As we mentioned, we do enjoy looking at movies that we get as a recommendation. The best way to send us recommendations is either on our social media. We're at Dewey Pod Monster all over the place. If there's a social media, we're probably on it. Just search at Dewey Pod Monster. You can send us a message or a comment, whatever you want to do. We'll find it. You can also go to our website, which is crap.town. All of our previous episodes are there, and you can send us feedback there, including requests if you would like to do so. You can also go to our network page, which is yourunpodcast.com. I'm assuming there's probably a way you can get a hold of someone there. It would probably go to Scott, and he could tell us, hey, assholes, you need to talk about this New York movie or whatever, and, give us a proper flogging as it would be. But please go there. Please check out all the other shows while you're there as well. There is absolutely something for you on that site. It's awesome. We're very happy to be with that network. I'm forgetting stuff. Sean, what am I forgetting?
I was just going to add, if you want your answer to the question of the week answered on the show, you need to follow us on social media so you can find out what the question of the week is so you can answer it. You can find us on all the social media at Dewey Pod Monster. Everything we talk about on the show is linked in the show notes. Some of those are affiliate links. If you really want to support the show other than your suggestions, click on those links because we get like a penny for every $5 gazillion that Jeff Bezos spends on jet fuel. That's the best way to support us. If you want to follow my craft beer adventures in Michigan, you can find me at youtube.drafttherapy.com, or you can find me on all the social media networks at Draft Therapy.
That's it.
That's
all we got.
That's all we got.
That's it.
That's it.
We'll be back next week with Mutant Ninja Turkey invades Thanksgiving for Ninja November or something totally different. Have a good week.
Blah, 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 blah.